Elena Carter had never imagined that cleaning pianos would change her life forever. She was 26 years old, working 3 jobs just to pay her rent in a small apartment on the outskirts of Chicago. Every morning, she woke up at 5, made herself cheap instant coffee, and prepared for another long day. Her main job was at a cleaning company that served the wealthy neighborhoods downtown. The houses she cleaned had more rooms than she could count, and the people who lived in them rarely noticed her presence. On a cold Tuesday morning, her supervisor called her with an urgent assignment. A private estate needed immediate cleaning service. The regular staff had called in sick, and the owner was hosting an important event that evening. Elena agreed without asking questions. She needed the extra money. Her younger brother Marcus was in his final year of college, and she had promised their late mother that she would help him finish his education. The estate was unlike anything Elena had ever seen. The iron gates opened automatically as the company van approached, revealing a long driveway lined with perfectly trimmed hedges. The mansion stood at the end, 3 stories of elegant architecture surrounded by gardens that looked like they belonged in a magazine. Elena felt her heart beat faster as she stepped out of the van, carrying her cleaning supplies. A stern-looking woman in a gray suit met her at the door. She introduced herself as Mrs. Patterson, the house manager. She explained the rules quickly. Do not touch anything valuable. Do not speak to the owner if you see him. Do not enter the East Wing without permission. Elena nodded at each instruction, though she found the 3rd rule strange. What was in the East Wing that required such secrecy? The cleaning took most of the morning. Elena worked through the grand living rooms, the formal dining area, and several guest bedrooms. Each room was decorated with expensive art and furniture that probably cost more than her entire year's salary. She tried not to think about the inequality of it all. Her mother had always taught her to focus on her own path instead of comparing herself to others. Around noon, Elena found herself near the East Wing. She had finished her assigned areas and was looking for Mrs. Patterson to report her progress. The hallway was quiet, almost too quiet. Then she heard it. The faint sound of music, beautiful and sad, floating through the air like a ghost. Someone was playing the piano. Elena knew she should walk away. The rules were clear, but something about that music pulled her forward. Each note seemed to carry a weight of emotion that she recognized in her own heart. She had lost her parents in a car accident 3 years ago, and the grief still lived inside her, hidden beneath her daily routines and forced smiles. She moved closer to a partially open door. Through the gap, she could see a grand piano, black and shining under the soft light from tall windows. A man sat at the keys, his back to her. His shoulders were broad beneath a simple white shirt, and his dark hair was slightly messy, as if he had been running his fingers through it. He played with his eyes closed, lost in the melody. Elena recognized the piece. It was Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, one of her favorites. Her father had been a music teacher before his death, and he had taught her to play this exact piece when she was 15. She had not touched a piano since the accident. The memories were too painful. The man suddenly stopped playing. His hands froze above the keys, and for a moment the silence was deafening. Then he spoke without turning around. His voice was deep and cold. I specifically requested privacy. Leave now. Elena stepped back, her face burning with embarrassment. She mumbled an apology and turned to leave. But before she could take more than 2 steps, her foot caught on the edge of an antique rug. She stumbled forward, and the cleaning supplies in her arms went flying. A bottle of polish crashed against the marble floor, shattering into pieces. The man finally turned around, and Elena found herself staring at the most striking face she had ever seen. Sharp jawline, high cheekbones, and eyes the color of a winter storm. But those eyes held no warmth. They looked at her with annoyance and something else, something that looked like pain quickly hidden behind a wall of ice. Who are you? He demanded. Elena Carter, sir. I'm from the cleaning service. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to intrude. I heard the music, and you heard the music, he repeated, his voice flat. And you decided to ignore every instruction given to you. Elena bent down to pick up the broken glass, her hands shaking. She felt tears forming in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had faced worse than a rude rich man. She had buried both her parents on the same day. She had worked double shifts while grieving. She had survived things that would break most people. "I apologize, sir. It will not happen again." The man watched her for a long moment. His expression was unreadable. Then he noticed something that made his eyes narrow. A small pendant had slipped out from under Elena's shirt during her fall. It was a golden treble clef, simple and elegant. "That pendant," he said. "Where did you get it?" Elena's hand instinctively went to the necklace. "It was my father's. He was a music teacher." The man's expression shifted slightly, though Elena could not identify the emotion. He stood up from the piano bench and walked toward her. He was tall, at least 6 feet, and his presence filled the room in a way that made her nervous. "Your father taught music. Did he teach you?" Elena hesitated before answering. "Yes, he did. A long time ago. Do you play?" "I used to. Not anymore." The man studied her face as if searching for something. The coldness in his eyes had not completely disappeared, but there was now a hint of curiosity mixed in. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. "My name is Alexander Whitmore. This is my home. You will return tomorrow at the same time. Come directly to this room." Elena looked at the card in confusion. The name Whitmore was famous. Anyone who read business news knew about the Whitmore family. They owned one of the largest investment firms in the country. Their net worth was in the billions. "I don't understand, sir. Why would you want me to come back?" Alexander Whitmore did not answer her question. He simply turned back to his piano and sat down again. His fingers hovered over the keys, but he did not play. His voice was dismissive when he spoke again. "Mrs. Patterson will provide you with the details. Close the door on your way out." Elena wanted to argue. She wanted to demand an explanation. But something told her that Alexander Whitmore was not a man who gave explanations. She picked up the rest of her supplies, her mind racing with questions. What did this billionaire want from a simple cleaning woman? Why had he shown interest in her musical background? And why did the sadness in his playing feel so familiar to the sadness in her own heart? As she closed the door behind her, Elena could not shake the feeling that her life was about to change. The rational part of her brain warned her to stay away. Rich men like Alexander Whitmore did not notice women like her without a reason, and that reason was rarely good. But another part of her, the part that had loved music before grief stole it away, felt drawn to the mystery of the man and his piano. She would return tomorrow, not because he had ordered her to, but because she needed to understand. The melody he had played still echoed in her mind, and she recognized the emotion behind every note. It was the sound of a broken heart, and somehow, despite all logic, she felt connected to it. The news of Alexander Whitmore's engagement spread through Chicago's elite society like wildfire. Within days, Alana's face was plastered across gossip magazines and social media. People wanted to know everything about the mysterious woman who had captured the heart of the city's most eligible bachelor. Who was she? Where did she come from? How had a simple girl with no social standing managed to win a billionaire? Elena found the attention suffocating. Reporters camped outside her apartment building. Her phone rang constantly with requests for interviews. Her old colleagues from the cleaning company either congratulated her or accused her of sleeping her way to the top. Her brother Marcus was the only one who seemed genuinely happy for her, though even he had questions she could not answer. "Do you actually love this guy?" Marcus asked during one of their weekly dinners. He was a smart kid, about to graduate with a degree in engineering, and he had inherited their mother's ability to see through lies. Elena stirred her coffee and avoided his eyes. "It's complicated. That's not an answer, Ellie. I know. But it's the only one I have right now." The truth was, Elena did not know what she felt. Every day spent with Alexander confused her more. He was kind to her in ways she had not expected. He remembered small details about her life, her preferences, her fears. He had donated a large sum to the music program at the school where her father had taught, establishing a scholarship in David Carter's name. When Elena found out, she had cried for an hour, overwhelmed by a gesture that went far beyond their business arrangement. But Alexander was also distant in ways that frustrated her. There were moments when she could see the real man beneath the armor, vulnerable and warm. Then something would shift, and he would retreat behind his walls, treating her with the formal politeness of an employer rather than the intimacy of a partner. She never knew which version of him she would encounter on any given day. One afternoon, while practicing alone in the music room, Elena heard raised voices coming from Alexander's study down the hall. She tried to ignore it, but curiosity got the better of her. She walked quietly toward the sound and stopped outside the partially open door. "This is absurd, Alexander. A cleaning lady? Have you completely lost your mind?" The voice belonged to a woman, sharp and cutting. Elena peered through the crack and saw a tall woman with silver blonde hair and the kind of bone structure that belonged on magazine covers. She was beautiful in an intimidating way, all sharp angles and cold elegance. "My personal life is none of your concern, Victoria," Alexander replied, his voice dangerously calm. "It is my concern when your poor judgment threatens the company. I am the largest shareholder after you. Do you think the Nakamura deal will go through when they find out you're engaged to some nobody from the slums?" Elena felt like she had been slapped. She should leave. She should walk away and pretend she had heard nothing. But her feet would not move. "Elena is not a nobody," Alexander said, and the steel in his voice made Elena's heart race. "She is intelligent, talented, and more genuine than anyone in our social circle, including you." Victoria laughed, a cold sound without humor. How sweet. The great Alexander Whitmore, brought low by a pretty face. Isabella would be disappointed. The silence that followed was deadly. When Alexander spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried more threat than any shout. "Do not speak my wife's name. You have no right. You lost that right when you betrayed her trust. I was trying to protect you from yourself, just like I'm trying to do now. This woman is using you, Alexander. She sees dollar signs, nothing more. Once she gets what she wants, she'll disappear and take half your fortune with her." Elena had heard enough. She stepped away from the door and walked quickly back to the music room, her mind spinning. Who was Victoria? What had she meant about betraying Isabella's trust? And why did her words about Elena hit so close to home? The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. Elena could not focus on her practice. The notes blurred together, and she kept making mistakes that would have horrified Professor Chun. When Alexander finally appeared in the doorway, she could see the tension in his jaw, the tightness around his eyes. "I assume you heard," he said flatly. Elena nodded. "Some of it. Who is she?" Alexander sat down heavily in his usual chair. For a long moment, he did not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was tired. "Victoria Hayes. She was Isabella's best friend from childhood. They grew up together, attended the same schools, moved in the same circles. When Isabella and I started dating, Victoria was supportive, or so we thought." He paused, running a hand through his hair. "6 months before Isabella died, I discovered that Victoria had been in love with me for years. She had been feeding stories to the press about our marriage, trying to create scandals that would drive us apart. When Isabella confronted her, Victoria admitted everything. She said she believed she would be a better match for me, that Isabella was too soft, too artistic to handle the pressures of being a Whitmore wife." Elena felt sick. That's horrible. Isabella cut her out of our lives completely. It broke her heart. Victoria had been like a sister to her. I think the stress of that betrayal contributed to her illness. She had a heart condition, something she had been managing since childhood. The doctor said emotional stress could trigger episodes. 3 months after the confrontation with Victoria, Isabella collapsed during a performance. She never recovered. Elena moved to sit beside him. She took his hand, and this time it felt natural. "You blame Victoria for her death." "I blame myself," Alexander said quietly. "I should have seen what Victoria was doing. I should have protected Isabella from her. Instead, I was too busy with work, with deals, with all the things that seem so meaningless now." Elena squeezed his hand. You couldn't have known. You can't control other people's actions. The only thing you can control is how you respond. Alexander looked at her with something close to wonder. You sound like Isabella. She used to say the same thing. Maybe she was right. They sat together in silence as the afternoon light faded. Elena thought about Victoria's accusations. The woman was cruel and manipulative, but was she entirely wrong? Elena had entered this arrangement for money. She had agreed to pretend to love a man in exchange for financial security. Did that make her any better than the gold digger Victoria accused her of being? Alexander, she said finally, I need to tell you something. He turned to look at her, and the openness in his expression made what she had to say even harder. When I agreed to this arrangement, I did it for the money. I won't pretend otherwise. I had debts and my brother's tuition, and I was desperate. But somewhere along the way, things changed. The money doesn't matter to me anymore. What matters is that you've given me back something I thought I had lost forever. Music, connection, hope. She took a deep breath. If you want to end our agreement, I understand. I'll return every penny you've paid me. But I want you to know that whatever happens, I'm grateful. You helped me heal, Alexander. And I hope, in some small way, I've helped you too. Alexander was silent for so long that Elena began to think she had made a terrible mistake. Then he lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently, a gesture so tender it brought tears to her eyes. You have helped me, he said, more than you know. The house feels alive again when you're here. The music doesn't hurt as much. I wake up in the morning and feel something other than emptiness. I don't know what this thing between us is, Elena. I'm not ready to call it love. But I'm not ready to let you go either. Elena smiled through her tears. Then don't. That night, for the first time, Alexander did not retreat to his private quarters alone. They sat together in the music room until midnight, sometimes talking, sometimes just existing in comfortable silence. Elena played pieces she had not played in years, and Alexander listened with his eyes closed, letting the music wash over him. Something had shifted between them. The walls were crumbling. The pretense was fading. What remained was something fragile and new, something that terrified them both with its potential and its power. Outside, storm clouds gathered over Chicago. Victoria Hayes was not done fighting. The Nakamura deal approached, and secrets from the past were about to resurface, threatening to destroy everything they were building. But in that moment, in the music room filled with memories and possibility, Elena and Alexander were at peace. They had found each other in the wreckage of their broken hearts. And maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to heal together. The next morning, Elena stood outside the Whitmore estate, her heart pounding against her chest like a wild drum. She had barely slept the night before, replaying the strange encounter in her mind 100 times. Her brother Marcus had called her crazy when she told him about it. What kind of billionaire invites a cleaning lady to his private music room? But Elena had made up her mind. She was going to find out what Alexander Whitmore wanted. Mrs. Patterson met her at the door, looking slightly less stern than the day before. She led Elena through the grand hallways without speaking, her heels clicking against the marble floors. When they reached the east wing, she stopped and turned to face Elena. Mr. Whitmore has instructed me to tell you that you are no longer employed by the cleaning service. Effective immediately. Elena's stomach dropped. She needed that job. Without it, she could not pay her rent or help Marcus with his tuition. Her mind raced through calculations of her savings, her bills, her limited options. I see, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. May I ask why? Mrs. Patterson's expression softened just slightly. Because you have been hired directly by Mr. Whitmore, your new salary will be 3 times your previous income. Your duties will be explained by Mr. Whitmore himself. Before Elena could process this information, the door to the music room opened. Alexander stood in the doorway, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit. He looked like he belonged on the cover of a business magazine, powerful and untouchable. But Elena noticed the dark circles under his eyes, as if he had not slept well either. Come in, Miss Carter, he said. His voice was not quite as cold as yesterday, though it still held the distance that kept her from feeling welcomed. Elena followed him into the room. In the daylight, she could see details she had missed before. The walls were covered with framed photographs, but not the kind she expected in a rich man's home. These were not pictures of business achievements or social events. They were pictures of a woman, beautiful and smiling, with eyes that sparkled with life. In some photos, she sat at the piano. In others, she stood next to Alexander, and in those, he looked like a completely different person. His eyes were warm. His smile was genuine. He looked happy. Alexander caught her staring at the photographs. His jaw tightened, and he looked away. That was my wife, Isabella. She passed away 2 years ago. Elena felt her heart ache for him. She knew that kind of loss. She understood the way it hollowed you out and left you walking through life like a ghost in your own body. I'm very sorry for your loss. Mr. Whitmore. He nodded once, a quick movement that suggested he did not want to discuss it further. He walked to the piano and ran his fingers along the smooth surface. Isabella was a concert pianist, world class. She could play anything, and she made it look effortless. We met at a charity gala where she performed. I told her she was the most beautiful musician I had ever heard. She told me I was the most awkward billionaire she had ever met. A ghost of a smile crossed his face, then disappeared just as quickly. After we married, she tried to teach me. I was a terrible student. No patience, no natural talent. But I kept trying because it made her happy. After she died, I couldn't bear to look at this piano. It sat untouched for 18 months. Then one day, I started playing again. I don't know why. Maybe I thought if I learned to play properly, I could feel close to her again. Elena listened in silence, understanding more with each word. The sadness she had heard in his playing was not just sadness. It was grief, the same grief that had kept her away from pianos for 3 years. Mr. Whitmore, why am I here? He turned to face her, and for the first time, she saw vulnerability in his eyes. It was brief, quickly hidden, but she had caught it. I have a proposal for you, Miss Carter. I have a business dinner next month. Very important clients from overseas. They are traditional people who believe that a man without a family is a man who cannot be trusted with business. My advisors have been pressuring me to present a more stable image. A wife, or at least a fiancée. Elena felt her confusion growing. I still don't understand what this has to do with me. Alexander walked to a window and looked out at the gardens. His voice was matter-of-fact, as if he was discussing a business deal and not something deeply personal. I need someone to pose as my fiancé for the event. In return, I will pay you $500,000. Elena almost laughed. The amount was absurd. It could pay off all her debts, cover the rest of Marcus's education, and still leave enough for her to start a new life. But she was not naive. Rich men did not offer $500,000 without expecting something significant in return. Why me? You could hire any actress, any model. Women who are used to this kind of thing. Why choose a cleaning lady you met yesterday? Alexander finally turned to look at her. His expression was serious and tired. Because you heard me play, and you did not laugh or pity me. You understood the music. I could see it in your face. And because my wife's favorite piece was Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the same piece I was playing when you walked in. You wear a treble clef pendant and you say you no longer play. That tells me you have your own pain, your own reasons for walking away from music. I don't want a professional actress who will smile and pretend. I want someone who understands what it means to lose something precious. Elena sat down in a nearby chair, her legs suddenly weak. This was insane. She should refuse immediately and walk out of this house and never look back. But she could not deny that his words had touched something inside her. He was right. She did understand, and she understood that underneath his cold exterior, Alexander Whitmore was a man drowning in grief, just like she had been. There's more to your offer, isn't there? She asked. Alexander nodded. There is one condition. Before the dinner, you must learn to play the piano again. My wife's piano, specifically. The clients will expect my fiancée to share my interests. Isabella was famous for her playing. If I present a woman who claims to be my future wife, she must be able to sit at that piano and perform, at least at a basic level. Elena shook her head. I haven't played in years. The memories are too difficult. My father died, and I just couldn't. I know it's difficult. Alexander interrupted, and his voice was slightly gentler. I know because I faced the same choice. I could have let this piano collect dust forever. I could have locked this room and thrown away the key. But I decided that the pain of playing was better than the pain of forgetting. Music was how Isabella lived. If I abandon it completely, I lose the last piece of her. They looked at each other in silence, two strangers connected by a shared understanding of loss. Elena thought about her father, about the hours they had spent together at their old upright piano, about his patience and his laughter, and the way he had believed in her talent. She had locked those memories away to protect herself. But maybe Alexander was right. Maybe protecting yourself from pain also meant protecting yourself from healing. If I agree to this, she said slowly, I have conditions of my own. Alexander raised an eyebrow. Go ahead. First, I want the money to be divided into 2 payments. Half now, half after the dinner. This protects both of us. Second, I want a written contract that clearly states this is a business arrangement only. No physical expectations, no inappropriate behavior. Third, I want the right to walk away at any time if I feel uncomfortable, with the first payment kept. Alexander studied her for a long moment. Then, for the first time, she saw something like respect in his eyes. You negotiate like a businesswoman. Miss Carter, I've learned to protect myself. Mr. Whitmore, life taught me that lesson the hard way. He extended his hand. Then we have a deal. You will come here every day to practice. I will arrange for the best piano teacher in the city to work with you, and you will accompany me to any social events necessary to establish our story. We will present ourselves as a couple who met through a mutual love of music. It's close enough to the truth to be believable. Elena shook his hand. His grip was firm and warm, and she felt a strange flutter in her chest that she quickly dismissed. This was a business arrangement. Nothing more. When do we start? She asked, right now. Alexander gestured to the piano. Sit down and show me what you remember. Elena walked to the piano with legs that felt like they were made of stone. She sat on the bench and placed her fingers on the keys. The ivory felt familiar and foreign at the same time. 3 years was a long time. She had worked so hard to forget this feeling. She took a deep breath and began to play. The notes came back slowly at first, stumbling and uncertain. But as she continued, muscle memory took over. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, guiding her through the melody. By the time she reached the middle of the piece, tears were streaming down her face. When she finished, she expected criticism. Instead, she found Alexander standing beside the piano, looking at her with an expression she could not read. Your technique needs work, he said quietly, but your emotion is perfect. That's the part that cannot be taught. Elena wiped her tears and stood up. I hope this arrangement gives you what you're looking for, Mr. Whitmore. Call me Alexander, he said. If we're going to convince people we're engaged, formality won't help. She nodded. Then call me Elena. And just like that, their strange partnership began. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Elena had ever experienced. Every morning, she arrived at the Whitmore estate and spent hours at the piano, her fingers slowly remembering the language they had once spoken fluently. Alexander had hired Professor Margaret Chun, a retired concert pianist who had trained at Juilliard and performed in the greatest halls of Europe. Professor Chun was strict but fair, and she saw potential in Elena that Elena herself had forgotten existed. You have natural talent, Professor Chun told her one afternoon. After Elena had successfully played through a complicated passage without a single mistake. Whoever taught you as a child knew what they were doing. But talent means nothing without practice. You have let yourself become rusty. We must polish you until you shine. Elena practiced until her fingers ached. She practiced until the melodies followed her into her dreams. She practiced because she had made a promise, but also because something inside her was waking up. The music was bringing back memories of her father, but instead of only pain, she now felt gratitude. She could hear his voice in every note, guiding her, encouraging her, loving her from beyond the grave. Alexander often sat in the corner of the room while she practiced. At first, his presence made her nervous. She could feel his eyes watching her, evaluating her progress. But as the days passed, she realized that he was not watching to criticize. He was watching because the music brought him peace. When she played, the tension in his shoulders would ease. The hard lines around his mouth would soften. For those brief moments, he looked almost human. They began to spend time together outside the music room as well. The story they were creating for the public required them to know each other, to understand each other's habits and preferences. Alexander took her to expensive restaurants where she felt out of place. Elena took him to a small family-owned Italian place, near her apartment where the pasta was made, fresh every day, and the owner treated every customer like a long-lost relative. "This is the best food I've had in years," Alexander admitted, twirling spaghetti around his fork in a way that suggested he had rarely eaten anything so simple. "My chef prepares elaborate meals every night, but none of them taste like this." "That's because this is made with love," Elena said. "My mother used to say that the secret ingredient in any good meal is the heart of the person who cooks it." Alexander looked at her with curiosity. "You speak about your parents often. Tell me about them." So Elena told him. She told him about her father, David, who had taught music at a local high school for 30 years and played the organ at their church every Sunday. She told him about her mother, Rosa, who had immigrated from Mexico as a young woman and built a life through hard work and determination. She told him about the accident, how a drunk driver had crossed into their lane on a rainy night, how she had received the phone call while working a late shift at the restaurant where she waited tables at the time. "They were everything to me," Elena said, her voice thick with emotion. "When they died, I felt like someone had cut me in half. I had to become both mother and father to my brother. I had to give up my dreams of studying music so I could work and support us. Sometimes I was so angry at them for leaving. Other times I was angry at myself for being angry." Alexander listened without interrupting. When she finished, he reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. It was the first time he had touched her since their handshake on the day of their agreement. His palm was warm and steady. "Grief makes us feel things we don't expect," he said quietly. "After Isabella died, I fired half my staff because I couldn't stand anyone being in the house. I stopped attending board meetings. My business partners thought I had lost my mind. Maybe I had. But anger is part of grief, Elena. It doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you human." From that night on, something shifted between them. The formal distance began to close, replaced by a tentative friendship built on shared pain and mutual understanding. Elena learned that beneath his cold exterior, Alexander was a man who cared deeply, but had been taught from childhood to hide his emotions. His father had been a ruthless businessman who believed that feelings were weaknesses. His mother had died when he was young, and he had been raised by nannies and boarding schools. "Isabella was the first person who ever saw me," Alexander confessed one evening. They were sitting in the music room, a habit they had developed after Elena's daily practice. Everyone else saw the Whitmore name, the money, the power. She saw a lonely man who didn't know how to connect with people. "She spent 3 years teaching me how to open up, how to laugh, how to live. And then she was gone." Elena understood now why he had chosen her for this arrangement. He was not looking for a beautiful trophy to hang on his arm. He was looking for someone who could understand the darkness he carried inside him. Someone who had walked through the same fire and survived. The first public appearance happened 3 weeks into their arrangement. A charity gala for children's education held at a grand hotel downtown. Alexander arrived at Elena's apartment in a black limousine, looking like he had stepped out of a fashion advertisement. Elena opened the door in a stunning blue gown that had been delivered to her apartment earlier that day, along with matching jewelry and shoes that probably cost more than her car. "You look beautiful," Alexander said. And for once, his voice held genuine warmth. "Thank you. You clean up pretty well yourself." He offered his arm, and she took it, trying to ignore the butterflies in her stomach. This was pretend, she reminded herself. A business deal. She was playing a role, nothing more. The gala was overwhelming. Hundreds of wealthy people in expensive clothes, drinking champagne and discussing things like summer homes in the Hamptons and investment portfolios. Elena felt like an imposter, certain that everyone could see through her disguise. But Alexander stayed by her side, introducing her as his fiancée with a possessive pride that made her cheeks flush. "Where did you two meet?" asked a woman dripping with diamonds, her eyes sharp with curiosity and something that looked like jealousy. "Through music," Alexander answered smoothly. "Elena is an incredibly talented pianist. I heard her play once and knew I had to know her better." The lie flowed so easily from his lips that Elena almost believed it herself. She smiled and nodded at the appropriate moments, playing the part of the devoted fiancée. But as the evening wore on, she noticed that the smiles were becoming less forced. When Alexander placed his hand on the small of her back to guide her through the crowd, she felt a spark that had nothing to do with acting. Near the end of the evening, the host announced a special request. Would Mr. Whitmore's talented fiancé honor them with a performance on the grand piano that stood on the stage? Elena's blood turned to ice. This was not part of the plan. She was not ready. She turned to Alexander with panic in her eyes, but he simply squeezed her hand and leaned close to her ear. "You can do this," he whispered. "Play like you play when it's just us. Forget everyone else. Play for yourself. Play for your father." Elena walked to the piano on trembling legs. The room fell silent. She sat on the bench and looked out at the sea of expectant faces. Her mind went blank. She couldn't remember a single piece, a single note. Then she closed her eyes and thought of her father. She thought of the way he used to sit beside her, patient and kind, never losing his temper, no matter how many mistakes she made. She thought of the night he died, how she had been too busy with work to call him back when he left a voicemail. She thought of all the things she never got to say. Her fingers found the keys, and she began to play. It was a piece she had not played since her father's funeral, a simple melody he had written for her when she was born. He had called it Elena's song. It was not technically impressive, not the kind of piece that won competitions or impressed critics. But it was pure love translated into notes. When she finished, the silence stretched for what felt like eternity. Then the applause began, thunderous and genuine. Elena opened her eyes to find people standing, dabbing at their eyes with expensive handkerchiefs. She looked at Alexander and saw that he was standing too, and the expression on his face made her heart skip a beat. He was looking at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. That night, in the limousine on the way home, Alexander took her hand and held it. Neither of them spoke. There were no words for what had passed between them. The pretend engagement was beginning to feel dangerously real, and both of them knew it. But neither was ready to admit it, because admitting it would mean opening their hearts to the possibility of being hurt again. Elena stared out the window at the passing city lights and wondered how she had gotten here. 3 weeks ago, she had been a cleaning lady with nothing but grief and determination. Now she was wearing designer clothes, attending galas with billionaires, and feeling things she had sworn never to feel again. The walls around her heart were cracking, and she was terrified. The Nakamura delegation arrived in Chicago on a gray November morning. 20 executives from one of Japan's largest investment firms, led by the elderly patriarch Hiroshi Nakamura himself. The deal on the table was worth billions, a merger that would create the largest private investment company in the world. Everything depended on this meeting, and everyone in Alexander's company knew it. Elena had never felt more pressure in her life. She had practiced until her fingers bled. She had memorized facts about Japanese business culture, appropriate greetings, and proper etiquette. She had been fitted for 12 different outfits for various events throughout the week. And she had been coached by Alexander's team on every possible question she might face. Remember, Alexander told her the night before the first dinner, Mr. Nakamura values tradition and family above all else. He believes that a man's character is reflected in his choice of partner. Just be yourself, Elena. That's all I ask. But being herself was complicated. Which self should she be? The cleaning lady from the wrong side of town? The orphan who had worked 3 jobs to survive? The woman who was pretending to be engaged to a billionaire for money? Or the woman who was starting to feel things she had no right to feel? The dinner was held at the Whitmore estate, in a formal dining room Elena had cleaned once but never entered as a guest. The table was set with china that was older than her grandmother, and the crystal glasses probably cost more than her monthly rent. Elena sat beside Alexander, her back straight, her smile fixed, her heart pounding so hard she was certain everyone could hear it. Mr. Nakamura was a small man with sharp eyes that seemed to see everything. He spoke excellent English, but preferred to communicate through his translator, a young woman named Yuki, who shadowed him at all times. Throughout the dinner, he asked polite questions about the weather, the food, the state of American politics. But Elena could tell he was really studying her, evaluating her worthiness. After dessert, Mr. Nakamura turned his attention directly to Elena. The table fell silent. "Miss Carter," he said in careful English, "Mr. Whitmore tells me you are a pianist. I would be honored to hear you play." Elena glanced at Alexander, who gave her an encouraging nod. She stood on legs that felt like water and walked to the grand piano that had been positioned in the corner of the dining room for exactly this purpose. As she sat down, she could feel every eye in the room on her. Victoria Hayes was among the guests, having insisted on attending as a major shareholder. Her smirk said she was expecting Elena to fail. Elena closed her eyes and remembered Alexander's words. Be yourself. She thought about her father, about the countless hours they had spent at the piano together. She thought about Alexander and the broken music that had drawn them together. She thought about Isabella, whom she had never met, but somehow felt connected to through this instrument. She began to play. Not the complicated classical pieces she had been practicing for weeks, but something simpler, something real. She played a traditional melody she had learned from her mother, a song from Mexico that spoke of love and loss and the strength of the human heart. She had never performed it publicly before. It was too personal, too raw. When she finished, the silence stretched for several heartbeats. Then Mr. Nakamura began to clap, slowly and deliberately. The rest of the table joined in, and Elena opened her eyes to find tears on the old man's cheeks. Beautiful, Mr. Nakamura said. That was not technique. That was soul. You play like my mother used to play, with your whole heart open. He turned to Alexander with new respect in his eyes. You have chosen well, Mr. Whitmore. A woman who plays like that is a woman of substance. I look forward to doing business with you. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of celebration. Alexander's team was euphoric. The preliminary agreements were signed before the week was over, and the full merger was set to be finalized by spring. Elena had done her job. She had convinced the most important business partner of Alexander's career that their engagement was real. But that night, alone in the guest room she had been given at the estate, Elena could not sleep. Something Mr. Nakamura had said haunted her. You play with your whole heart open. It was true. She had stopped pretending during that performance. She had played with genuine emotion, and that emotion was not just about her father or her past. It was about Alexander. She was falling in love with him. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Somewhere between the piano lessons and the late-night conversations and the gentle way he held her hand in public, she had stopped acting. She had started feeling. And that was dangerous, because their relationship was built on a contract. Once the business dinner was over, once she had served her purpose, she had no reason to stay. A soft knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Alexander standing in the hallway, still dressed in his formal suit. I couldn't sleep, he said. I keep replaying your performance in my mind. That song you played, it was not in her practice repertoire. No, it was something personal. Alexander stepped closer. The hallway was dim, lit only by moonlight streaming through tall windows. Elena could smell his cologne, feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Elena, I need to tell you something," he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. "These past weeks have changed me. I thought I hired you for a business arrangement. I thought I could keep this professional. But every time I hear you play, every time you look at me with those honest eyes, every time you say something that makes me feel less alone, I lose another piece of my control." Elena's breath caught in her throat. "Alexander, let me finish. I know this started as pretend. I know I had no right to ask you to enter my world. But somewhere along the way, the pretense became something else. When Mr. Nakamura asked about you tonight, I realized that everything I said was true. You are talented. You are genuine. You are the most remarkable woman I have ever known since." He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "Since Isabella." Elena understood without him saying it. "I'm not trying to replace her," Elena said softly. "I would never want to replace her. I know. That's why this works. You don't try to compete with her memory. You exist alongside it. You've given me permission to love again without forgetting her. I didn't think that was possible." They stood inches apart, the air between them charged with unspoken words. Alexander reached up and touched her face, his fingers tracing the curve of her cheek with heartbreaking gentleness. "I'm falling in love with you, Elena Carter. I don't know if I'm ready for this. I don't know if you feel the same. But I couldn't go another day without telling you the truth." Elena felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "I feel the same," she whispered. "I tried to fight it. I told myself this was a job, that you were my employer, that we came from different worlds. But my heart wouldn't listen." Alexander pulled her into his arms. The embrace was warm and desperate, and full of everything they had been too afraid to admit. When he kissed her, it was soft at first, tentative, asking permission. Then Elena kissed him back, and all the walls came crashing down. They stayed in the hallway for what felt like hours, holding each other, talking in whispers about their fears and hopes and dreams. For the first time in years, Elena felt completely safe. For the first time since Isabella's death, Alexander felt completely alive. But even in their happiness, shadows were gathering. Victoria Hayes had witnessed their embrace from the end of the hallway. She had slipped away unseen, her face twisted with jealousy and rage. She had spent years waiting for Alexander to move on, positioning herself to be his next choice. Now some nobody from nowhere had stolen what she believed was rightfully hers. Victoria was not going to let that stand. She had destroyed Isabella. She could destroy Elena the next morning. While Elena and Alexander shared breakfast with hopeful smiles, Victoria was already making phone calls. She had contacts at every major news outlet in the city. She had investigators who could dig up dirt on anyone. And she had a story to sell, a story about a poor girl who had schemed her way into a billionaire's bed through an elaborate con. The storm was coming. Elena and Alexander did not know it yet, but their love was about to face its greatest test, and the outcome would determine whether their story ended in happily ever after or heartbreak. The headlines hit like a bomb. Elena woke to her phone buzzing with dozens of notifications. Her brother Marcus had called 5 times. Her email was flooded with messages from reporters. When she finally opened a news site, her heart stopped. Billionaire's fake fiancé exposed. The truth about Elena Cart article was brutal. It detailed everything. How Elena had been a cleaning lady at the Whitmore estate. How she had been hired to pose as Alexander's fiancée in exchange for money. How their entire relationship was a business transaction designed to fool investors. The story included photos of her in her cleaning uniform, quotes from former colleagues who called her ambitious and desperate, and financial records showing large deposits into her bank account from Whitmore accounts. But the worst part was the final paragraph. An anonymous source, clearly Victoria, had added a cruel twist. According to this source, Elena had deliberately targeted Alexander, researching his late wife's love of music and learning piano specifically to seduce him. She was not just a hired pretender. She was a calculating con artist who had preyed on a grieving widower. None of it was true. The allegations about deliberately targeting Alexander were complete fabrications. But the truth, that she had entered a paid arrangement to pose as his fiancée, was damaging enough on its own. Elena sat on her bed, unable to move, unable to breathe. Everything she had built was crumbling around her. The genuine feelings that had developed between her and Alexander would now be seen as part of the con. No one would believe that what started as pretend had become real. She had been branded a gold digger, and that label would follow her forever. Her phone rang again. This time it was Alexander. She answered with trembling hands. "Elena, I'm coming to get you. Don't talk to anyone. Don't leave your apartment." His voice was controlled, but she could hear the fury beneath the surface. "Alexander, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen." "I don't know who." "I know who," he interrupted. "Victoria. This has her fingerprints all over it. But right now, I need you to stay calm. We'll fix this together." An hour later, Elena was at the Whitmore estate, sitting in Alexander's study while his legal team discussed options. The merger with Nakamura was in jeopardy. Stock prices were falling. Board members were demanding answers. Everything Alexander had worked for was threatened by the scandal. "We could release a statement admitting to the arrangement," suggested Marcus Webb, Alexander's chief communications officer. "Get ahead of the story. Explain that it evolved into a genuine relationship." "That will look like damage control," argued Sarah Chun, the head of legal. "It won't change the narrative. The public has already decided that she's a fraud." Elena sat in silence, feeling like a prisoner at her own trial. These people were discussing her life, her character, her future, as if she was not in the room. She looked at Alexander, hoping to find reassurance in his face. But he was staring at the window, his expression unreadable. "There's another option," Sarah continued carefully. "We end the engagement publicly. Alexander makes a statement that he was deceived by Miss Carter. He positions himself as a victim, not a participant. It protects the company and preserves the Nakamura deal." Elena felt like she had been stabbed. End the engagement. Position himself as a victim. Throw her under the bus to save his business. Absolutely not. Alexander's voice cut through the room like a blade. "I will not lie about Elena. I will not pretend I was deceived when I was a willing participant. And I will not sacrifice the woman I love to protect my stock prices." The room fell silent. Elena stared at him with shock and overwhelming gratitude. He had said it publicly, in front of his entire team. "The woman I love." Alexander stood and walked to where Elena was sitting. He took her hand and pulled her to her feet. "We are going to fight this," he said, looking into her eyes. "Not with lies, not with spin, with the truth. We will tell our story, our real story, and let people judge for themselves." The press conference was held the next day. Every major news outlet was present, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions. Elena stood beside Alexander at the podium, wearing the same blue dress from her first gala, her hands shaking, but her chin held high. Alexander spoke first. He admitted to the arrangement. He explained his grief after Isabella's death, his fear of vulnerability, his misguided attempt to solve a personal problem with a business solution. He described how Elena had entered his life and changed everything. "I hired Elena Carter to pretend to be my fiancée," he said, his voice steady. "I am not proud of that decision. It was born out of loneliness and a desperate attempt to avoid dealing with my own pain. But what I could not have predicted was that somewhere between the piano lessons and the late-night conversations, the pretense would become irrelevant. I fell in love with Elena, not because she was playing a part, but because she stopped playing a part. She was honest with me when no one else dared to be. She challenged me to feel again. She saved me." Then Elena stepped forward to the microphone. Her voice was quieter, but it carried across the silent room. "I am not going to stand here and pretend I'm innocent," she began. "I accepted money to pose as Alexander's fiancée. That's the truth. I did it because I was poor and desperate, and because $500,000 would change my life. But I want you to understand something. No amount of money could make me feel what I feel for Alexander. No contract could create the connection we have. I fell in love with a man who was broken and lost, just like me. Together, we found something neither of us expected to find. Healing. She paused, gathering her courage. The woman who leaked this story wanted to destroy me. She wanted to prove that I was a fraud. But here I am, telling you the whole truth, hiding nothing. I am not a con artist. I am a daughter who lost her parents, a sister who worked 3 jobs to keep her family together, a woman who was given an impossible opportunity and took it. And I am telling you now, in front of the entire world, that I love Alexander Whitmore. Not for his money, not for his name, for his heart. The questions that followed were brutal. Reporters demanded more details, challenged their story, searched for contradictions. But Elena and Alexander answered everything with patience and honesty. By the end of the hour, something had shifted in the room. The initial hostility had faded. In its place was something that looked like respect. The public response was divided. Some people remained skeptical, convinced that the whole thing was a calculated performance. But many others were moved by their vulnerability. Social media lit up with discussions about love, authenticity, and the pressure society puts on people to be perfect. Elena received thousands of messages from strangers sharing their own stories of love found in unexpected places. The Nakamura deal survived. Hiroshi Nakamura released a statement saying that he valued honesty above all else, and that Alexander and Elena had demonstrated remarkable courage in telling their truth. The merger proceeded as planned. Victoria Hayes was not so fortunate. Investigation by Alexander's legal team uncovered evidence that she had paid journalists to run the story and had fabricated the most damaging allegations. She faced lawsuits for defamation and was removed from her position as a shareholder after a vote of no confidence by the board. But for Elena, the greatest victory was personal. She had faced her worst fear, public humiliation, and survived. She had stood before the world and claimed her truth. And when it was over, Alexander took her hand and led her back to the music room, where everything had begun. "I'm proud of you," he said. Sitting beside her on the piano bench, Elena leaned her head against his shoulder. "I'm proud of us." Outside the windows, the November sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The scandal was behind them. The storms had passed. What lay ahead was unknown, but for the first time in years, Elena was not afraid of the future. She had found her way home. 1 year had passed since the press conference that changed everything. The world had moved on to new scandals and new stories, but Elena and Alexander had built something that would last far longer than headlines. Their love had been tested by fire, and it had emerged stronger, purified by the trials they had faced together. The Whitmore estate looked different now. Where once it had felt like a mausoleum dedicated to grief, it now buzzed with warmth and life. Elena had brought color into the rooms, photographs of her parents alongside Isabella's pictures, artwork from local Chicago artists, and flowers from the gardens she had planted herself. The East Wing was no longer Forbidden's territory. It was their sanctuary, a place where music filled the air every single day. Elena had returned to her true calling. She had enrolled in the Chicago Conservatory of Music, pursuing the dream her father had always held for her. Professor Chun continued as her mentor, and her progress amazed everyone who heard her play. She was no longer just playing from memory or emotion. She was playing with the technical precision of a professional, combined with the heartfelt expression that could not be taught. College at 27 felt strange at first, but she had learned that life did not follow a straight path, and dreams did not come with expiration dates. Marcus had graduated with honors and accepted a position at a top engineering firm. He credited his sister with everything, a fact that embarrassed Elena and made her proud in equal measure. They still had dinner together every week, a tradition they had started when they were alone in the world and continued now that their worlds had expanded. The day Elena had dreaded and anticipated finally arrived. A crisp autumn afternoon, exactly 2 years after they had first met. Alexander had been acting strangely for weeks, nervous and distracted in ways that were completely unlike him. Elena suspected something was coming, but could not guess what. He asked her to meet him in the music room at sunset. When she arrived, she found the room transformed. Hundreds of candles cast a golden glow across the space. Rose petals covered the floor in a path leading to the piano, and Alexander stood beside it, dressed in the same suit he had worn on the night of their first gala. "What is all this?" Elena asked, her heart beginning to race. Alexander smiled, and it was the smile she loved most, the one that reached his eyes and made him look years younger. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Carter." Elena laughed, remembering the first time he had said those words. Another business arrangement? Something slightly different. He took her hands in his. "2 years ago, I made the best decision of my life. I brought a stranger into my home and asked her to pretend to love me. I told myself it was for business. I told myself I could control the outcome. I was arrogant and broken, and so certain that I would never feel anything real again." His voice grew thick with emotion. "You proved me wrong in every possible way. You taught me that grief and love can exist together. You showed me that opening your heart again is not a betrayal of the past, but an honoring of it. You played music back into these walls and into my soul. Elena, you saved me." He released her hands and reached into his pocket. When his hand emerged, it held a small velvet box. Elena's breath stopped as he opened it to reveal a ring, not a massive diamond meant to impress, but a delicate band set with a small sapphire surrounded by tiny pearls. It was beautiful in its simplicity, perfect for the woman she was rather than the woman the world expected a billionaire's wife to be. "I know we already had a fake engagement," Alexander said, his voice steady but his eyes shining. "But I'm asking you now for a real one. Elena Maria Carter, will you marry me? Not for business, not for show, because I love you with everything I have and everything I am. And I cannot imagine spending another day of my life without you as my wife." Elena looked at the ring, at the man she loved, at the piano that had brought them together. She thought about all the paths that had led to this moment. Her father's death that had silenced her music. Her mother's strength that had taught her to survive. The cleaning job that had seemed like just another struggle, but had opened the door to everything. "Yes," she whispered. Then louder, with tears streaming down her face and laughter bubbling up from her chest. "Yes, Alexander. 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into a kiss that felt like coming home. When they finally separated, both laughing and crying at the same time, Alexander gestured to the piano. "I have one more surprise. Sit down and play something." Elena sat at the bench she had come to love. The same bench where she had rediscovered her music, where she had fallen in love, where she had healed wounds she thought would never close. She placed her fingers on the keys, intending to play something joyful and celebratory. But before she could begin, Alexander sat down beside her. He placed his own fingers on the keys in a way she had never seen before. "I've been practicing," he said, almost shyly. "In secret, for the past year. I wanted to surprise you." And then Alexander Whitmore, the man who had once confessed to having no natural talent, began to play. It was not a complicated piece. It was not technically perfect. But it was Elena's song, the melody her father had written for her, the piece she had played at the gala that had changed everything. He had learned it. Note by note, measure by measure, he had mastered the song that meant more to her than any other. And as he played, Elena understood the full depth of his love. This man, this guarded and wounded man, had spent a year in secret practice to give her this gift. He had taken something precious to her and made it his own offering of love. When he finished, she was sobbing too hard to speak. She wrapped her arms around him and held on, feeling his heartbeat against her chest, knowing without doubt that this was exactly where she was meant to be. The wedding took place 6 months later in the gardens of the Whitmore estate. It was small by billionaire standards, only 100 guests, mostly family and close friends. Marcus walked Elena down the aisle, standing in for their father, but also celebrating in his own right. Professor Chun played the processional, and instead of traditional vows, Elena and Alexander each performed a piece on the piano. playing their love into music for everyone to hear. In her speech at the reception, Elena spoke about the strange path that had led her here. She talked about loss and healing, about walls and bridges, about the power of music to connect two broken hearts. "I used to believe that my story ended when my parents died," she said. "I thought I was living in an epilogue, just going through the motions until my own ending came. But Alexander taught me something I had forgotten. Every ending is also a beginning. Every silence holds the possibility of new music. I am not living an epilogue. I am living the best chapter of my life, and I get to write it with the man I love." Alexander raised his glass and looked at his wife with eyes full of wonder. "To Elena," he said, "my partner, my healer, my love, and to the piano that brought us together. May our music never end." The guests toasted and cheered. The dancing began, and as the night turned to stars and the stars turned to dawn, Elena Whitmore, once Elena Carter, once a cleaning lady with nothing but grief and determination, looked at her life and found it full of more joy than she had ever dared to dream. She still played the piano every day. She completed her degree and began performing at small venues and larger ones. She established a music scholarship for underprivileged students in her father's name, funded by the Whitmore Foundation. She visited schools and community centers, telling children that their circumstances did not define their potential. That talent existed everywhere if someone was willing to nurture it. And every evening, she returned home to the estate, to the music room, to the man who had challenged her to play one piano and ended up giving her the world. The Billboard CEO had smirked that first day, arrogant and cold. The broken heart healer had smiled, uncertain and hopeful. Together, they had created something neither could have built alone. A love story written not in words, but in notes, in melodies, in the language they shared. The piano that had once belonged to a ghost now belonged to their future, and their music would play forever.